Life is a never-ending cycle of things happening over and over again. This is why everybody is so nuts. One day we are so back, only for it to be over the next. And it never ends. Nothing ever happens. There is no change. But if all of this is true, then what stands as well is that my backlog requires immediate attention, and that judging by the shape of the circle, we are so back. Far Cry is more than a series, more than a hit, it's everything. There are just so many Far Crys that are not Far Crys that to justify their existence they have to either find or invent their own niches. There's Doom Far Cry, Destruction Far Cry, Zipline Far Cry, Weep Far Cry, Boring Far Cry, but is Dying Light a Far Cry? It is an open-world action game with tons of side quests, feather-light RPG mechanics, and areas to be secured and regrouped in later. It's also a masterclass in making a world that you have to actively exist in, instead of passively stroll through. It is one populated by zombies that are no slouch. No matter how far you progress and how much your moveset expands throughout the game, 4 or 5 of the even most vanilla zombies are enough to cause a big problem. Your best line of defense is avoiding the street level altogether, so you find yourself using Dying Light's signature fantastic parkour system, jumping around on rooftops and climbing on structures as much as you can. Such traversal requires panning ahead at least the next 50 meters of your journey and a map designed densely and vertically enough to support it. Furthermore, combat relies on mostly melee weapons that degrade and break, but also can be crafted and upgraded. Directly, it puts more decision making into your trips. How far do I need to go? How much bank do I bring? What kind of consumables should I craft? But indirectly, it encourages scavenging, pushing how long can you stay in an area before it gets too hot, how much free inventory space do you need, and how much are you willing to bend your plan. That last question becomes less and less obvious with introduction of random supply drops and survivors in dire need, both providing a bit of that risk-reward, not only in the direct danger sense, but also by bringing you closer to nighttime. Haran after dusk is a dangerous place, infested with much more vicious undead than usual, but also one where some very useful resources can be found exclusively. Once again, risk-reward. Besides, I very much appreciate the size of the open world. It's refreshingly ungigantic, enough not to feel like a total slog running and jumping around on foot. It's also filled with little landmarks and districts much unlike the rest, making learning the map more than feasible. And by the way, how is it possible that a game made 11 years ago on a Eurojunk engine looks this fucking good? Seriously, if I was one of those suckers with 50 series GPU, I would be rioting the fucking streets. Alright, let's settle this. Is Dying Light a Far Cry?
Yes.
A little bit, but in creating an environment that puts constant pressure, that overpowers, it positions itself at the exact philosophical opposite of Far Cry's white savior power fantasy. At which point, does it really matter? Out of 10. Selaco's pitch is quite simple. It's fear in GZ Doom. And if you find yourself to be young enough for neither of those things to have any meaning to you, then let me sell it a bit differently. It's one of the best feeling shooters I have played in a long while. Everything is so juicy. The sound, the particle effect, the feedback, the feel. My immediate reaction to every firefight is a diabolical grin. You're not quite a glass cannon, but it's close. You're not pushed into the crossfire like in so many neo-boomer shooters, but rather into this rhythm of using corners, corridors, or any viable cover to outmaneuver the bodies. This might sound like Selaco is pushing towards a primarily defensive playstyle, but the sci-fi mob police at the other end of the barrel is equally mobile and has equally massive damage output. In short, it pays to be quick. This approach to combat flow is nothing new. In fact, it's something quite vintage. It's basically Fear with War's melee system, so now you understand this logo, at least. While we're at it, Selaco kinda showcases how much of a moving target nostalgia is. In 2007, 2008, when this idea of retro gaming started becoming a thing in online forums, this was exclusively referring to Master System and NES stuff. Nowadays, nobody bats an eye when PS2 is called retro, and I regularly see collectors boosting the value of my Xbox 360 pile, so that's coming soon, I guess. Similarly, boomer shooters started up as references to exclusively Doom and Quake. The inclusion of post-Half-Life influences into the genre has proven difficult, but Industria and Selaco show that this could change in the future, or at least I think so. Speaking of Selaco, maps. It is a linear game, but maps remain quite open, both to accommodate the peekaboo combat as well as to house the many secrets and the implication that this world is much bigger than it actually is. In typical Doom fashion, which this game kinda is, you have access to the map, but even without it your path is planned smartly enough not to need it that much. Selaco is a kind of game that will continuously surprise you, either with another level with completely new aesthetics, a new type of enemy that is fun to fight, or with the idea of save room, gunsmithing, upgrades, the volume of flavor text to find, the fact that it's running on heavily modified Doom code, or the fact that with all that was mentioned, the polish, the content, the feel, it's still in early access. Just fucking buy it. Out of 10. Doom is a kind of game that does not need any introduction in the archival sense. Everybody knows what Doom is, but with people that were on the ground zero, ones that played it in 1994 becoming grandparents, it is more important than ever to keep Doom alive, available, one click and go. Not only to entertain us during retirement, but also for the future developers. Guys that will be shaping the entire medium of video games are either making core memories chasing that victory royale or working on stuff in Roblox. I think that pretty much every publisher except Epic Games has done a decent job at preserving most important shooters from the turn of the century in available and affordable packages. Obviously, we can mostly contribute that to the post-Doom 2016 boomshoot craze, but the optimist side of my brain sees how much there is to learn and relearn from those games, and I just hope that's exactly what will happen. As far as the actual topic of this segment goes, I am fascinated by the ways people bend Doom to fit pretty much anything with a processor. My personal favorites would be Doom port for PSP, that was my go-to poison in middle school, and the Xbox Classic port that for a long while was my preferred way of playing on a big screen. With each new console we would get an alright port with basic features, alongside improvements to the community-run PC ports that are mostly limited to how fast one of your CPU cores can run. The answer is pretty fast, by the way. So the official releases would focus on getting a playable version of Doom out, and community would do crazy stuff that only communities do. Mods, conversions, 4K, ray tracing, playing on a pregnancy test, stuff like that. What makes the new KEX port stand out is that it's the first official port that does not just put Doom-shaped 4x3, 60 FPS, 4 episodes quote-unquote authentic, original, block through the massive hole of excess performance, but it does try to strike the balance between archival authenticity and appeal to the people that play GZ Doom. It's the first release that expands Doom to fit that massive hole modern hardware provides. You get 4K 120 FPS with some coding magic where one core renders a quarter of the screen, so you keep the software rendered authentic look with the performance a modern gamer expects. Remade OST from that album Andy released a while back is more than nice, and one could argue authentic, as well as a mod browser that is janky but lets you explore the past 30 years of community efforts. Not to mention the usual for Night Dive additional episode that not only is more than decently put together, but also introduces new enemies and weapons. And everything is wrapped up nicely, with menu where both games and most notable expansions are ready to go. With one click, available, alive. Against the wickedly out of spawning vats. As I was reminding myself about the greatness of Doom, I allowed myself to immerse far deeper than knees into the vibe by reading the Doom novel. It is interesting how little writers had to work with Doom being more than short on narrative, and at the same time how little they had to add to turn it into a book. Now we know Doom Guy's name, some stories from before visiting Phobos, and in the most un-Doom move of them all, his inner dialogue. But it's the price of writing in first person, which is very much on brand. My biggest issue is that Hugh and Brad couldn't fucking help themselves and had the Doom Guy chasing a romantic interest, but at the same time it becomes a far better read once there are two characters who can talk to each other. On the other hand, the most amusing aspect, and one that makes it a must-read for any fan, is how much was lifted directly from game's level design, mechanics and pacing. Following an incomplete map looking for colored keys, collecting ammo from zombies, chain reaction barrel explosions, firefights taking place in specific arenas from game that you will recognize, collecting ammo for a gun before getting it, not to mention that ammo and floor plan make for major plot points. Soul Sphere that looks and functions exactly like it does in game, and my favorite of all, the concept of health points. In a very metaphysical sense with much left unsaid about it, but believe me, novel Doom Guy has health points as well, and all above is drenched in pulp and contemporarily edgy. Yeah, I liked it. Gave me a chuckle. Mudrunner is a kind of game that will make you rethink your approach towards car games.
Cheese.
As it is not a racing game like almost every title with cars, but a driving game. It's a very exclusive club. The only other title that sparks to mind would be Euro Truck Simulator. Both games are much alike in the way you interact with the open world and how much skillful driving differs from typical racer, but also from each other. So let's stick to Mudrunner. The entire series, as well as its climb to fame, would be the fantastic mud physics. Mud is not something you just pass through a bit slower than usual. It's a constant obstruction that demands respect and understanding. It's a physical object that responds to your approach. It reshapes, sticks to tires, behaves differently depending on your weight, tire size, drivetrain setup over which you have control. How many times have you plowed through it? It demands planning ahead and understanding the limitations of your vehicle. It's a type of game unlike anything I have ever played before. Unique driving mechanics require unique structure, so you don't really have a campaign or any type of championship, but a set of decently sized maps with enough terrain quirks to feel unlike each other. Those are populated with garages for repairs and modifications, fuel stations for obvious reasons, and lumber mills for cargo pickup. You complete a map by transporting enough stuff from point A to a couple of points B, but in a world filled with treacherous terrain, roads to nowhere, and mostly incomplete map, it is your job to scout, plan, and deal with whatever happens along the way. It sounds tense, but it's a very relaxing dart game. Not to mention that it's a decade old and still stunning. Before I let you go, there is one tangent that I would like to go on. I am very far from any sort of Russian romanticism, but I also find myself living somewhat near to the damn place, near enough to have heard the tales of remote Siberian villages and towns connected with nothing but muddy roads that summertime become nearly impenetrable slashes and during winter freeze at whatever dangerous twisted shapes they ended up being. Mudrunner, or rather Spin Tires, is a series that could be birthed only by someone that had to face it. Besides the obviously spectacular off-road physics, it's filled with little things that say a lot about the frustrations that this setting brings. Roads to nowhere, map that has to be unveiled, old crusty equipment, buildings that remember the times of Union, all distinctly Russian, all distinctly Siberian. Not that I take any issue with series expanding its settings, driving a unhealthy crop-colored UAZ can get a bit boring, and I had tons of fun with expeditions, but I just like to take note of the shift from exotic to fantasy. I give it 3 good condition working WADAs out of 1 singular Syrena Sport. Hot Wheels Unleashed is a notable title from the short-lived licensed games revival we had a few years back. It is a tradition that peaked on PS2 and got lost sometime during the Xbox 360 generation, and Unleashed ends up being a more than fitting throwback by being cheap and simple. What spoke to me was the very traditional arcade feeling, the little guy in everyday environment setting, and well, the price. Only one of those 3 that stands uncontested is affordability, as the remaining 2 fell victim to the typical licensed production cycle. There is not much use in the tiny guy vibe when every track is constructed with the signature Hot Wheels orange parts, rendering every race samey and monotonous visually. That saved a bunch of resources as it allowed unlimited reuse of assets both for tracks and its surroundings, but it really stinks when literal PlayStation 1 games did it far better with far less. The big money grab of Unleashed is stored within another signature of the IP, cars themselves. Every man, no matter his age, will lose the track of time once faced with the bottomless Hot Wheels bin. The amount of shapes and variations of cars this company produces is nothing short of staggering, and Unleashed does embody that with amount of digital toys available to buy and race. The race part falls short, as with so many cars for devs to tune, there ends up being very little variation in handling, rendering them ultimately redundant. And buy falls even shorter, as most of them are to be bought with real money through DLC. They want you to collect the digital ones as well. Desert Drifter out of Roger Dodger. Indies play more than instrumental part in the way I approach video games. It was them that reignited my passion for gaming when I was a teen, that proved me that you don't need to spend much, if anything at all, for a solid game, that there are uncountable ways of having fun, and that convinced me that this medium can be more than a digital toy, that it can be art. And Apotheon is somewhere in the middle of it. Its free-to-play multiplayer arena shoot-off was one of the first titles I ever played on Steam. It might deeply shock you to learn that competitive component of a little-known indie from 11 years ago is long dead, but at the time it was decently lively, until it wasn't, and then I forgot about it for a long-ass time. So now, thanks to my sudden remembrance and a Steam sale, I got to check out the main course. Apotheon, first and foremost, is a decent game, but it also is a very early example of what I like to call the Cuphead syndrome. Listen, video games are products, shocking, and they have to distinguish themselves, build hype. AAA like to do that with amazing graphics and scale, and I'm sorry to tell you this, but indies, once everybody got bored of the 8-bit pixel art Contra clones, had to do this as well. The scale requirement is covered by the never-ending supply of roguelikes, and the graphics by art style that imprints to your brain the very second the trailer starts. The Cuphead is with us in the room when an indie goes balls deep in pursuit of the chosen look, deep enough that with signature indie limited resources, or worse yet, lack of any idea beyond art style, the rest of the game, the part of it you actually play, suffers. Hence the Cuphead. Everybody recognizes it for the way it looks, arguably the biggest run and gun release since the genre died, but it doesn't even come close to decent modern examples that try to push the envelope, not to mention the genre classics. Apotheon is quite clearly a game that started with its aesthetics, one that even today makes it stand out, and everything else had to be built around it. Luckily, the basics of its combat system turned out to be quite solid. Every weapon has its own feel and requires different approach, without any being too OP, and weapon destruction system encourages experimentations, my favorite way of balancing things. There are many ways to fling stuff, executable with analog input while attacking, that vary in effect depending on the type of weapon. Combine that with shields of different sizes, throwables including bombs and projectiles, and you get a decent combat sandbox, one where it pays to observe and understand enemies' loadouts. On this basic core mechanics level, the only thing that roughens my feathers is inconsistent momentum while running. On another overarching mechanics front, there are many more things. Apotheon is an RPG, but one with little weight behind its progression, an interesting plot and map, boring locales, and tons of non-humanoid enemies and bosses that are totally unfun to fight. This game's best side shows when you are locked into close quarters combat with someone playing by the same rules. So maybe it was the arena that was the main course after all. 210 out of 300 Spartans. I Am Your Beast is an unexpected favorite of mine. It appeared on my Steam wishlist a while back, solely on the premise of gunplay looking neat, and slid into my Steam library once I found a key for a price close enough to zero. I generally dislike comparing cel-shaded games to the two that instantly spark to mind. It's lazy writing, but Beast looks enough like the snowy wooden levels from 13 to make the comparison obligatory. That being said, beyond cel-shading, it is lacking the comic book influences. It switches those for bullet traces and hit markers, kinda stuff more useful for the kind of game it is, because gameplay-wise, those could not have been less alike. EMIB is a kind of shooter suspiciously made for me to like it. Gunplay feels blazing fast, snappy, and it provides tons of feedback. There's no reloading, encouraging thinking on your feet and learning all the guns. That combined with the little HP you have and the constant pressure from intentionally predictable stress dispensers like snipers and choppers causes constant pressure forwards and turns you into a rabid dog. Obviously, this type of high-octane action is not really feasible for its entire runtime, and the project is too small to spread it over exploratory and story segments. Thank God. Beats by Dre does not have a story, but it's a compilation of arenas and short levels, never longer than 2 very tense minutes, that once beaten unlock additional challenges. You do not get walking sections, but there's chill music in level selection menu to cool you off, and since your grade depends on your pace, style, and progress sometimes requires completing such challenges, you have plenty of opportunities to test different approaches and min-max the shit out of those levels. It's incredibly arcade, and that's why I love it. 10 out of 13. I have talked about Sniper Elite 3 before, and this segment will be looking at its sequel by comparison. I encourage you to watch this one if you want to be up to speed with my very influential and opinion-making take, and to watch every single video I have posted. Because, listen, you watched this one thus far. There's clearly some kind of spark between us. We could make something special together. Or I could make it for you to watch on the internet. As my content cuckold. Kurwa mać. There have been 2 games today that prove that 10 years old graphics can still impress, and Sniper Elite 4 cannot. It doesn't look completely awful, but noticeably worse than previous contenders, with Sniper's himself's Ken doll hair sticking like a sore thumb. Artistically, I would like to imagine that zombie army and Hitler missions allowed Rebellion to loosen up and take this series less seriously. And that's true to a point, but not enough. Too many things are still played too straight. The guy is too rugged, the Wunderwaffe too believable, the Germans too competent. There are no Nazi cultists, Luftwaffe, flying saucers or Arctic bases, but that's just me. Ultimately what matters are the massive improvements to the formula, most notable being the maps. This was the first game in the series made for the PS4 generation, and it shows. Maps are not only much bigger, which by itself does not make them any better, but they are more interesting. There are tons of additional vantage points, routes to the objectives that themselves are often located in little sublocales or distinct areas like a castle, town, an island, stuff like that. Not to mention the verticality that in a sniper game does not go unnoticed. Pair that up with much expanded gun roster, gun upgrades, traps, grenades, environmental kills, and additional mission objectives that can alter your route. In effect, there are countless ways to skin a cat, but it is more than expected that a player will find his preferred tactic and stick to it, no matter how boring it is. The idea of pushing player into the fun zone has been on my mind for a while, and this marks the third time I mention it today. So the thing I find incredibly curious about those two games is that Sniper Elite 3 seems insecure about having you played as a sniper. It is a third-person shooter that controls like any other of the time, so it combats your muscle memory by limiting your open engagement options and overfeeding you information so that you would not be forced to engage. On the other side of the rainbow sits Sniper Elite 4. I already mentioned the much more open map with many more ways of approaching objectives. There are also additional challenges to any map, calling for different things, including open gunfights, like completion with a shotgun in one case, very unsniper-like. Some objectives are hidden behind dense geometry, pretty much ruling out sniping and forcing either guns blazing or arms reach stealth. Weapon upgrade system now does not work on any kind of XP or currency, but challenges. You need to kill a lot of crowds with MP40 to be able to reduce its spread, pushing you to give an honest shot to every weapon, skin more cats. There are also now a ton of checkpoints. If you screw up, you are never sent back more than a couple of minutes, completely eliminating consequences of trying the ineffective thing. And last but not least, SMG ammo is no longer heavily restricted, so now you actually can go sicko mode on some Jerrys. Man, I'm old. There is a ton of mechanical and structural pressure to not only be an asshole from a vantage point, but to do some unsniper things as well, which comes as a surprise after Sniper Elite 3. My game theory is that with much larger and more open maps, where you can put tons of distance between a crowd and you, exploiting vantage points became way more feasible. Too feasible, and you cannot constantly run around and confuse someone that's too far away. That's a ton of running. So the path of least resistance was reopened. Sniper Elite 4 embraces the foundations of a really competent combat sandbox that it was building over the years, and pushes you to explore as much as possible in a complete opposite direction Sniper Elite 3 did. This kinda shows that Rebellion does not really know what it's doing. That after all this time, in 2017, it still was struggling with how to structure its game about projectile surgery. I haven't played the newest ones, but I really hope that this series eventually gets a grip, elevates beyond the comprehension of mere mortals and becomes an honest, true 8 out of 10. But for now... And that's it. That's all I have for you today. There was supposed to be a few more games, but such is life. One of those sparked enough rumblings from yours truly that you will see it and all of its 18 quintillion planets in a separate video very soon. But until then, take care.